to start recording. Okay, so we're going to talk today about top disputes between buyers and sellers. One thing I do want to mention is if you have any questions, you may write them in the chat box, and I'll go over those at the end. So the first thing I want to mention today is don't allow buyers and sellers to communicate. And what do I mean by that? Well, what happens is sometimes when you go show a property and the seller is there, and then seller and buyers and the buyer, they start talking, and sometimes they'll even exchange phone numbers or email address, and that I could tell you right now opens up a can of worms. Okay, it is never good when the buyers and the sellers communicate. I'm going to give you some examples of what can transpire. I've seen this happen before. And I understand, sometimes you can't control the fact that, the seller is at the property, but if there's any way you could ask the listing agent to, please ask the seller to leave the home, especially during a home inspection. So what happens is, the buyer and the seller, perhaps, the buyer's interested in some furniture, right? The buyer's interested in some furniture, and what happens is that I don't sell furniture, I sell real estate. So I let the buyer and the sellers communicate after pretty much the home inspection and the appraisal have been completed. Okay, but sometimes the sellers and the buyers, they communicate because of maybe the buyer is interested in buying some furniture, the buyer is interested in buying an item that they saw in the home, and next thing now the seller is insulted because the buyer offered to pay less than what the seller was willing to accept, and now we complete the home inspection, and now it's time for the buyer to ask for repairs, and now the seller, because he was insulted by the buyer over this furniture, now it makes it very difficult for the real estate agent to negotiate repairs. So that's just one scenario. I'll share another one later on, but I can tell you, you will save yourself a lot of headaches if you prevent the buyer and the seller from communicating. So another dispute that I've seen, between the buyer and the sellers, obviously, is repairs. So what happens is with the repair, I think that a lot of the disputes sometimes can be prevented if the agent communicates with the buyer or the seller as far as setting up expectations. So the buyer, in the buyer's mind, they have this thought that a home inspection can pass or fail. Okay, that is the first mistake right there. So you should, as a real estate agent, you should never say to the buyer, well, you could have the home inspection, and if the home inspected, and if the home inspection fails, she could back out and get your money back. Okay, we should not, as real estate agents, we should never be saying that a property, that a home inspection can pass or fail. Okay. The other thing is that as real estate agents, we should let the buyer know that, what a home inspection is, the purpose of it, and how they're going to be getting a report. And once they get that report, the home inspector will note his findings and make recommendations, and that you will go over, that the agent is going to go over the home inspection with the buyer to address any warranted items. I always make it clear that we're going to focus on warranted items. I focus on the summary page, and I strictly focus on warranted items, electrical repair, plumbing, roof, AC, things like that. Anything that's cosmetic, you need to let them know right away, okay, that those are items that you're not going to address with the seller, okay? I also recommend that before you put in an offer on the home, anything that is at plain view that the buyer sees that they would like to have repaired, negotiate that in the sales agreement, okay? Do not wait until do not tell the buyer, okay, we could address this after the home inspection. No, you don't want that, because what happens is that the seller, sometimes I've seen it many times, or the seller will get upset because the buyer saw the crack on the window, the buyer saw the screen torn, the pool cage screen torn, things like that. You want to address them before, okay? You want to address them when you put in the offer. You want to put it in writing and have the seller agree to making those repairs, okay? Do not wait until the home inspection, because this is where I see that then buyer and seller get into a dispute, and again, it becomes very difficult to negotiate repair request because of this, okay? So I recommend that you do that. And again, one of the things that I see sometimes is that the buyer takes control of the situation. He takes control of the transaction, and the buyer pretty much doesn't have, the agent doesn't pretty much have a grip on the buyer. So don't let the buyer control the transaction. You have to step in. You're the professional. That's why they have you. You have to come in and you have to say, okay, Mr. Buyer, for example, if they want something repaired that the seller does not agree, because again, it's cosmetic. So you have to step up and let the buyer know, Mr. Buyer, you're not being reasonable. This is not typical. This is a cosmetic thing, and therefore the seller doesn't agree, and he doesn't have to agree. So take control of the transaction. I see it many times where buyers or even sellers are just walking all over the agent. When everyone agrees to the repairs, make sure that you are creating an addendum and putting it in writing, okay? It needs to be in writing, and it should have an end date, as far as, or I should say, a time frame. You should allow them perhaps 2 weeks to make the repairs. Always, if possible, have them hire a licensed contractor and have them provide receipts as well, okay? You want to be able to get receipts. Sometimes it's a good idea, depending on what it is, to go back with the buyer and review those repairs to make sure that there's not going to be any surprises. You do not want to wait till the day before closing or the final walkthrough, the day of, to go into the property and go over these repairs and find out now that the buyer is not happy because the seller did the job, but they did a poor job. So, so make sure that you're putting in a time frame on the addendum, and that you get those receipts. And if at all possible, just go back in there and go over those repairs with the buyer to make sure that everything got done properly. The other thing too is, I see, for example, on the home inspection report, where the home inspector will make recommendations. That's what it is a recommendation, okay? If a water heater is 20 years old and he recommends that it be replaced, again, it's a recommendation. If it's working, it just has to be working. It doesn't need to be brand new. Okay, so that's something else that you have to address with the buyer, that if appliances are in working conditions, then the seller is not obligated to replace any appliances, even if they're 20 years old. I see I see agents asking the buyer to, excuse me, the seller to replace things that are not broken, they're just old, and because the seller refuses, because again it's working, so they feel that they do not need to be it's not his responsibility to buy a new refrigerator just because it's old. I'm going to move on to the next one. So escrow disputes. So one thing about escrow disputes is I notice agents, they most of the time do not know when the effective date of a contract is. And I've gone over this many times. Make sure you understand when the effective date of a contract is. The effective date of a contract is when the last party signed and it was delivered. So if your seller was the last one who signed and you got it at 11 o'clock p.m., but you did not email it to the buyer's agent until the next morning, 9 a.m., then your effective date is that day at 9 a.m., okay? It is not the day you got it back signed by the seller. So it's important that we know this, because one of the disputes that common disputes that I see between a buyer and seller is a buyer, a buyer thinking that he has a right to receive his money back because he's still within that home inspection period, or a seller thinking that he has claim to the buyer's escrow money because they are past the home inspection period. Okay, so make sure that you know when your effective date is. That way there's no disputes over who's going to be getting escrow, because if you are within that home inspection period, then your buyer can get out, or the buyer, I should say, the buyer can get out of the contract and get his money back. The other thing about escrow disputes that I see too, and I'll be very honest, I find it that in many times it's the agent's fault, because they, somewhere along the line, they did not communicate with all parties clearly. They sometimes they drop the ball, and one of them, the biggest one that I've seen it in the last year a couple times now, is the financing contingency. So agents have this idea that when a buyer does not qualify for financing, they automatically, they could withdraw, and automatically they get their escrow deposit back. Okay. And that is not the case. Okay, that financing contingency is only good during the loan approval period. Okay, so if you're using the assets contract states that the loan approval, you will have to get that within 30 days from the effective date. Okay, so during that loan approval period, then if the buyer doesn't qualify for financing, then yes, they could go ahead and back out of the contract and get their money back. But once you are beyond that loan approval, if you don't have, first of all, if you don't have that loan approval, you should always get an extension. Okay, always get an extension to extend the loan approval date until you actually have that from the lender and forward it to the buyer, to the buyers, to the listing agent. Now, as I mentioned before, so if you read the contract, it talks there how after the loan approval period has ended, okay, there's only 3 reasons that a buyer could back out and get their money back. Okay. And not qualifying for financing is not one of them. Okay. It is not one of them. So make sure that loan approval letter, it is very important. I have mentioned this before in other broker roundtables. I cannot stress it enough. And I continue to get phone calls from agents that did not get that loan approval letter. And now their buyer is about to lose their escrow deposit because of the loan approval letter, okay? Because it was never obtained, or I should say, the agent never requested an extension, okay? So protect your buyer's escrow money by extending the loan approval period, okay? Next one over is going to be disclosures. Okay, so as we know, we've mentioned this before many times, in the state of Florida, the seller is not required to fill out a seller's disclosure. However, here at Allens and James, we do ask for the seller to provide us with a seller's disclosure. Okay, so the seller should be familiar with their duty to disclose requirements. They may even want to disclose things that they may not technically be required to avoid potential problems from arising. So I'll give you an example. A seller may, some sellers, they want to disclose everything, right? You have the ones that they want to disclose everything, then you have the sellers that they're hesitant, okay? So for example, I've been asked before, well, I dropped something on my kitchen floor and I broke a tile and I had to replace a tile. Do I have to disclose that? No, you do not have to disclose that, okay? Now, if there was a roof leak, okay, and they had to patch that, yes, they have to disclose that. I've been asked before, well, there was a hole in the wall and I had to, patch it. Do I have to disclose that? No, you don't have to disclose that, okay? The water heater broke and you had to replace it, you don't have to disclose that, but it would be nice to let the buyer know that you have a newer water heater, okay? As a listing agent, okay, you have to sometimes be very diligent, okay, because again, sellers will not disclose everything. And although you don't have to disclose that there's a cracked tile in the bedroom, okay, and because what's going to happen is, I think we've all encountered this before, you'll see the seller will go ahead and put a rug over broken tile or a crack, right? So as a listing agent, you may, if you see, a rug or something like that, you may want to, move it and see what's underneath. That way there's no surprises. Home inspectors normally do that. Anytime they see a rug, they move it. But in case they don't do that, I've had this happen to me before where the day of closing, the buyer is very upset because they went to the final walkthrough and there is, either a scratch or a broken tile under like where the bed was. Well, there was some broken tile under the bed. Of course, they couldn't, see it because the bed was there. So now we have issues. So you may want to ask the, seller, hey, is there any broken tiles, any cracks, anything on the floor that possibly it's, covered? There's some furniture. That way we could just let the buyer know, because you don't want it to make it seem like, you're hiding something, right? So, and that's just something I do. I'm not saying that, we should be doing that, but that's just something, I like to do. I a couple years ago, I showed this vacant property, didn't have any furniture. And as I was walking out the door, I noticed that there was there were flyers. There was a table there were flyers on the table. Well, there was a rug under the table, and I kind of found that odd because, again, the property was vacant. It didn't have any furniture, and I moved the table and I moved the rug, and sure enough, when I stepped on the floor, I could see that there was a slope. Okay, I could feel it. I got, even as I started to walk on the floor, I could feel that there was just something not right about this floor. So you know, as a listing agent or even as a buyer's agent, you want to look after your customer, their best interest. So it's always a good idea to do something like that. As far as disclosing too, I've had this question asked before. They've asked me before in regards to if someone died in the property. Okay, if someone died, if uh, there was someone was murdered in the property, does the seller has to disclose that? And the answer is no. The seller does not have to um, disclose that. Okay, now there is a website, and I don't know if you want to give this to your buyers. This is probably something just for your own information. There's a website. It's called House Creep, CREEP, housecreep.com. And you enter the property address, and it tells you, if anyone was killed there, if anyone was murdered, died, whatever. It gives you a little brief history of the property. So again, I think that's just for your information, because you don't want to give that out to your buyers, because otherwise they may find something there. You have to also remember there's a difference between disclosure and buyer's due diligence. Okay, there's a difference. So a seller is obligated, or I shouldn't say obligated, but it's required to disclose any information that they have regarding the property. Okay, but the buyer also has to do their due diligence work as well. Okay, so there is a difference there. So understand that. Moving forward here, assignability. So I haven't encountered too many of these, but I do want to share it with you because we are, for those of us that are in the Sarasota, Bradenton area, even like Naples area, where there's, average age is a little bit older. There's a lot of buyers that like to purchase their home in the name of the trust. Okay, so what happens is if you prepare the contract under with the buyer's name, right, husband and wife, two individuals purchasing the property, and then you don't check off that the contract may be assigned. So what's going to happen, which by the way, I always put may not be assigned. Okay, but if you put, if you check may not be assigned, right, and then later on the buyer changes their mind and they said, oh, based on their attorney's advice, the attorney advised them to put the property in the trust name. So now they're calling you because they want you to change the buyer's name on the contract. Well, you're not just changing the name. Now it's going from an individual to an entity, because a trust is an entity. So once you do that, you really are reassigning the contract. And remember how I said, if you let the buyer and the seller communicate and something went wrong because they didn't agree on some furniture or even home repairs, what's going to happen is, there are some sellers who say, no, I don't want you to. They're just being jerks. And now the buyer has to wait and close the deal to be able to put it in the trust name after they close the deal. So again, this is this is something that I have seen from time to time. I just thought that it's not common, but I just thought I would bring it up only because, like I said, we are in the Sarasota, Manatee area, Naples area. A lot of older people, they have a trust, and I just want you to be aware of that, because I always ask them before I write the offer. I always ask them, whose name do you want on this contract? And if they ever bring up, oh, we have a trust, and I always say, well, you really need to talk to your attorney before we move forward, because we may not later be able to reassign this contract if we need to. Okay. Another common one here is furniture. Again, as I mentioned before, I do not sell furniture. I do not negotiate furniture. So if a buyer tells me that they liked something in the house and they want to buy it from the seller, I always tell them, well, we're going to wait until we've had the home inspection. We're going to wait until we have the appraisal, and then afterwards I'll put you in contact with the seller, and then you can discuss buying furniture from them. Okay, I do not handle that. Okay, I do not want to be in the middle of a buyer and a seller over furniture. Okay, it is not worth the headache. We don't get paid commission on furniture either. So light fixtures, curtains, curtain rods, washer, dryer, water softener. I have mentioned in the past that I do look at the MLS. And if I see the MLS printout that you upload, and if I do see that the washer and dryer are listed, I will make a note in the in SkySlope in the comment box asking you if the buyer wants the washer and dryer, because I saw it in the MLS sheet, but you didn't put it in the purchase agreement. Again, I am trying to avoid getting a call from you later on, or from the buyer himself or the seller, saying, well, they didn't put in the contract. Now, I took it and I shouldn't be responsible for it, because that is correct. It should be in writing. Okay. Another reason why you don't want the buyer and the seller talking to each other is because, so let's say in the MLS, the washer and dryer, okay, the washer and dryer were listed. You, the agent, did not put it in the contract. Okay. At the home inspection, the seller was there, and the buyer asked the seller if he was going to leave the washer and dryer, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to leave the washer and dryer, but then it wasn't in the contract. Next thing you know, the washer and dryer are gone, and the seller, the buyer's going to say, well, the seller told me that he was going to leave the washer and dryer. Well, it's not in writing. Okay. And we're going to go by what's in writing. So make sure that everything gets put in writing, even if like in the MLS, sometimes the agent will make a note saying that something doesn't convey. If it's in the MLS, okay, if something doesn't convey, and the agent put it in the realtor remarks, I would put it in the contract, okay, under the items that do not convey with the purchase of the home. Okay, just to be clear. Okay. One thing about curtains and curtain rods, we did have an agent, unfortunately, this exactly happened to him. The seller was at the property at the time of the home inspection. The buyer mentioned that they liked the curtains, and the seller, as a gift, okay, as a gift, the seller said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave them as a gift. And next thing you know, the seller took the curtains. And now I get a phone call from the agent the day of the closing. They were at the property doing the final walkthrough, and next thing you know, the curtains were not there, and the buyer was extremely upset, extremely disappointed. Luckily, the buyers were friends of the agent, but in some cases, that right there may kill not your deal, but it may kill your relationship with your buyer. Okay, and perhaps up until that point, everything was great; they were very happy with you, but now over curtains, okay, your buyers are upset at you. Okay, and if a buyer's upset at you, I don't think you want to send them a request for a review. Okay, because believe it or not, they are not going to say anything good that they experience throughout the deal. They're only going to remember that one thing. Okay, they're going to remember that they did not like that, they did not get the curtains that they got, and basically it's going to be your fault. Okay, because that's just how it is. That's how it goes, unfortunately. So I suggest that these things, for example, furniture, if the property comes furnished, okay, I create a separate addendum. Okay, I don't put it in the contract. If I put it in the contract, I make sure I state that the furniture has no value. Okay, but lenders don't like to see furniture in a contract, so I just create a separate addendum and for the furniture, and have the buyer and the seller sign, and I keep it. I send it to the title company, but I don't send it to the lender. Okay, again, they don't like to see that in the contracts, so it prevents issues down the road with the lender. And that is it. I see that we have some questions, so I am going to see what we got here. Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. You know what? That is a good one. Yes. A golf cart. Absolutely. Yes. Um, yeah, there you go. Sometimes, and again, some buyers, they're just not reasonable, and they expect the seller to, leave, a golf cart, or leave, something that is, you wouldn't typically ask for, right? So yeah, again, we do not, sell golf carts. We do not sell furniture, patio furniture, or outdoor furniture, any things like that. I let the buyer and the seller, again, towards the end of the transaction, then I let them, um, discuss that. I am not going to get in the middle of it. The other thing too is another scenario here I have for you, and I'll end with this one. So I had an agent that, this was years ago, I had an agent that she was a listing agent, and they worked from home. So they were there for every showing, and they heard, the buyers came, and they were having a conversation with the buyers, and the buyers were bragging how they had just gotten this, brand new car. It was a Lexus. It was like a $60,000 car, and how the wife had this, other expensive vehicle, and how they, had just came back from a trip from, Europe or somewhere. And well, guess what happened when the buyers did the home inspection, right? Now they were asking for the seller to make some repairs, and the seller didn't agree. And the listing agent, which at the time was my buyer, she offered to credit the buyer money from her commission, credit the buyer, so she could get the deal done, right? Because she didn't want to lose the deal over, a couple $100. Do you know that the seller did not allow her to credit the buyer money from her commission, because the buyer told the seller, "Oh, I just got a $60,000, vehicle. We just came back from vacation," and they were kind of bragging. And the seller said, "They have the money. You should not be crediting your commission because they have the money." Long story short, the deal did not close. Okay, the buyers backed out. The sellers did not care. Okay, they were not going to budge, and they closed that buyer. Okay, so again, another reason why you don't want your buyer and your sellers talking to each other, because the buyers are going to give too much information, okay, about themselves, about their financial situation. And next thing you know, now it makes it harder for you to negotiate repairs, because now the seller knows a lot about the buyer and they're like, no, wait a minute, they have the money, they should fix it themselves. So those are just some words of wisdom. I just want to avoid you having any headaches, because you'll be calling me and and I'm gonna say, yeah, that's why you should never allow that to happen. So and again, I understand how sometimes the seller has to be home. So in that case, you need to coach your buyer, coach them before going in the property. You need to tell them, do not talk to the seller. Why? Because you may give them too much information that he is going to use that against you. He's going to use it against me trying to negotiate the price down. So coach your buyers, okay? Coach them, let them know what can happen, especially even if there's no one at the property, you have to remember that the sellers, homeowners have cameras in the house, okay? And they could listen to what you're saying. So if they like the house a lot, tell them, do not say anything inside the house. Once you leave, then they could go ahead and tell you anything they want about the house, but not while you're in the house, because the seller is able to listen. And if they know that the buyer liked the house a lot, well, guess what? Now they know, oh, well, they'll be willing to, pay a full price because they really liked it. So anyways, let me just make sure that we don't have any more questions. Okay, no more questions. All righty, fantastic. Well, everyone have a wonderful week. I hope everyone stays safe and be healthy. Take care, everyone.